Well, hello everyone out there. Welcome to another Soothkeep live stream. We have an exciting program here tonight, and the program is on the Nephilim. I'm going to go ahead and bring up the slide right away, the first one, just to show you a foretaste of what we have coming. The black thread of the Nephilim. But before we get going, I do have a couple minutes worth of housekeeping that I would like to bring forwards. The first one is that my book, The 10 Potent Proofs for the Pre-Tribulation Rapture, has been doing excellent. By the way, if you can hear me, please give me a thumbs up. I don't want to be jabbering away and nobody can hear me or see me. But anyway, my book, The 10 Potent Proofs, has been doing really well. It's been selling well. If you feel like you need some more information on the pre-trib rapture, a few more arguments under your belt, or something to give to family members or friends that are on the fence, they don't know what to believe, or maybe they're a little bit convinced of a post-trib rapture, consider giving them the 10 Potent Proofs. It's been receiving some pretty high praise from heavyweights, which is a huge encouragement to me. Larry Spargimino of the Southwest Radio Church says it's a great introduction to the pre-trib rapture. Terry James said that it's one of the best books he's ever read on the subject. And Gary Stearman said something very similar, telling me that it was one of the best prophetic books he'd ever read on the pre-trib rapture. Couple other pieces of information here that are of note worth to some of you guys. If you're in the Southern or Central California area, please consider going to Brandon Holthouse's Geopolitical Ramifications of the Coming Election Conference, which is going to be September 6th and 7th in Woodland Hills, California, at the Warner Marriott Center. Well, the Warner Center Marriott Hotels. I'll be one of the speakers. Brandon will be there. Tom Hughes will be there. A number of your favorites are going to be there. Mondo Gonzalez and a number of others. And some men who are very deep in the geopolitical stuff. Also, another conference you might be interested in if you are anywhere in the Denver or Fort Collins area. Coming up on September 20th through the 22nd, Steve Schmutzer is going to have his annual Solid Bread Conference. This year, the theme is Confidence in the Chaos. Most prophecy conferences are a little bit heavy on the doctrine and the speculation, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. This conference, however, is going to be unique. It's going to have a special emphasis on spiritual warfare in the last days. So if this is up your alley, consider attending that conference. You can find information for Brandon Holthouse's conference on his website, or the Rock Harbor Church. You can find, or just Google Tip of the Spear. You can find Steve Schmutzer stuff if you Google Solid Bread Conference. Anyway, we had a great trip. We just returned from Oklahoma. I spent 2 days with Mondo Gonzalez shooting videos in the studio there. So be looking forward to those in the near future. Well, let's be done with the housekeeping and let's move on to the subject tonight. So I'm going to go back to the first slide. This is the black thread of the Nephilim. Notice that I use for my base text Genesis 3:15. I will put enmity between your seed and her seed. This is one of the most overlooked verses in the Bible that pertains to the redemption program that God has set in place here on planet Earth. A lot of people overlook it. It puts a backstory on redemption. It puts a backstory on the fall, puts a backstory on the sinfulness of man. If you don't understand this backstory, you're going to have a hard time understanding many passages of Scripture. So, if you're not familiar with me, my name is Lee Brainerd. My ministry is Soothkeep, which is an Old English word for Truth Fortress. I am a researcher and a Bible prophecy teacher, live in Harvey, North Dakota. There's my information. If you Google Soothkeep, you're going to find me on the internet, on YouTube, on Telegram, on Instagram, on Twitter, and a few other places like Rumble. Well, I got to learn how to use this technical stuff. Lot of mistakes here. All right. So my mission in the Soothkeep ministry, as most of you are familiar with, is truth. I love truth. I want to have the truth on every doctrinal issue that rattles the church and creates turmoil in the church. I want to have a correct doctrinal understanding of every passage in the Bible. It's a lofty endeavor. Probably none of us actually attain it, but many of us, if we are diligent, will actually make a lot of ground down that path. Now, let's look at my first slide in the presentation proper, and that's the black thread of the Nephilim. Notice that I have the law, the prophets, the writings, in other words, the other writings in the Old Testament. Then we come around to the Gospels, the epistles, and the book of Revelation. The Nephilim problem, the black thread of the Nephilim, is first introduced in the law. It's introduced in Genesis. We see little pieces of it through all of the books. We see it in the prophets. We see it in the writings. We see it implied at various places in the Gospels. We see it implied in the epistles. We see it come to a head in the book of Revelation. There's a black thread. Now, what's interesting about this is theologians often talk of the red thread of redemption. That red thread starts in Genesis and goes all the way through to the book of Revelation. The red thread of redemption starts with Adam's fall and God's restoration. That restoration included covering Adam and Eve with lambskins after he removed their fig leaves. Those fig leaves, folks, were the first religion on earth, the first church of the fig leaf. But the Lord replaced those fig leaves, which is man's religion, with the skins of lambs, a picture of being covered by the lamb. Those lambs were slain. That means there is blood that was offered, a sacrifice. And we also see in that context the promise of the seed of the woman, the first messianic promise in the Bible. And that golden thread of the Messiah runs from the book of Genesis all the way through to the book of Revelation. As you go through the Old Testament, there's more light given on the Messiah and more light given on the Messiah until we see an explosion of light on the Messiah with the Gospels and the first coming. We also see that red thread of redemption going through the Old Testament and the New Testament. In a very similar way, we have the black thread of the Nephilim going all the way through the Bible. Now, the problem is we're going to go into this a lot deeper, but the problem with the black thread started with the falling angels who cohabited with the daughters of men. We're going to look at that in a moment in Genesis chapter 6. The problem compounded, got more complicated when that original generation of Nephilim was wiped out in the flood, and their wandering spirits became the demons that now populate the earth. Got to bear in mind here, folks, those Nephilim were part angel and part man. So they couldn't suffer the lot of a full angel, and they couldn't suffer the lot of man. They couldn't just be cast into normal hell where man is placed, and they weren't really fit for the place where the angels go. And so they were left to wander the earth and continue the Nephilim problem. Now, both branches of the Nephilim problem are going to explode in the last days. We have the demonic aspect, which is still wandering around the earth doing their demonic thing. We have some diluted bloodlines of the Nephilim in the world doing its thing. The powerful leading families in the underworld, in the secret societies that are they are basically the secret government or the government behind all government. We call it the shadow government. Now, we're also going to see another incursion well, as L.A. Marzulli likes to say, when we go up, they show up. We're going to see a further incursion in the last days. Now, some people, when it comes to this black thread problem, they say, well, come on, there's not that much information in the Bible on the Nephilim. And they'll say, you quote Genesis 3:15 and you quote the first 4 verses of Genesis 6, and you make this massive doctrine out of those 2 passages. But there's way more light in the Bible on these things than those passages. Despite the fact that some claim the information is meager and inconclusive, the information is not really that meager. And it's, in my mind, it's very conclusive. There's way more information in the Bible on the subject than many of you out there in Christendom think. Now, I think the inconclusiveness that people feel is more a matter of hesitation to trust plain statements of Scripture at face value than it is on ambiguous statements in the Bible. The Genesis 6:1-4 is not ambiguous, but it's kind of rattling to take it at face value. It goes against church tradition, not ancient church tradition, let me add, because the early church fathers definitely believed in the Nephilim and the cohabitation of the fallen angels. But with the later church, which went in the Dark Ages and became the Catholic Church, and Protestants learned from them and evangelicals learned from the Protestants, they go down the replacement theology path and they go down the no Nephilim path. To those people who dominate the religious scene and who dominate society, to them, taking those passages seems, at face value, seems very bizarre. I hope none of you feel that, folks. Don't feel that taking these passages literally is wrong. To take them allegorically is wrong. To explain them away is wrong. Now, you'll have problems if you take them literally. You'll run into headway. You'll run into resistance. But all truth is resisted by the powers of darkness, whether they're working from pure darkness or working in the children of light. Now, as we go through the show tonight, we are going to present a tremendous amount of information. We're going to point you to different avenues that you can research. There's a ton of this material in ancient Jewish literature and ancient history. There's a ton of it in ancient mythology, in the megalithic remains, in Native American history. This stuff is all over the place. We're just going to point you in general directions. We're not going to get real technical tonight. So let's move on to the next slide. Genesis 3:15. And I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. Now, this is the law of first appearance, folks. Even though the Nephilim is not plainly stated here, it's definitely implied. This is the first appearance, and the law of first appearance says the first appearance is going to give you critical information that's going to color the subject all the way through the Bible. It's going to be the foundation of the subject all the way through the Bible. And what do we see here in the first appearance of the Nephilim in the Bible? We see a seed war that's going to go down throughout all of history. This seed war is the serpent seed versus the human seed. This is going to have several lines, and we're going to look at that in a moment. But we're going to specifically here, we have a serpent line and we have a messianic line. And these two lines are going to be in competition to win the hearts of men. And this competition, this contention, is going to come to a head with a false Messiah who's going to oppose the true Messiah. And in the last days, the false Messiah from the serpent line is going to go head to head with the true Messiah from the messianic line. And of course, we know who's going to win. And it won't even be a close battle. Now, on this subject, I want to point out that this text, Genesis 3:15, is very, very important. Now, some have probably made it out a little bit more important than it should be. They said if you don't understand Genesis 3:15, you can't understand the Bible and you can't understand the message of redemption. I think that's a little too strong. But certainly, if you don't understand Genesis 3:15, you're going to miss the backstory. You're going to miss the backdrop that's behind the story of redemption in the Bible, the redemption that we see from Genesis to Revelation. And you're going to struggle to understand some of the aspects of this redemption story, especially those that involve spiritual warfare and judgment. You're going to have a little bit more difficult time understanding this, why we have severe judgments like the flood, why we see a Canaanite extermination, and why we're going to have an absolute fiery end at the end of the age. But if you understand the backstory of the Nephilim, these things will make more sense. Now, once we enter into the truth of Genesis 3:15 and the seed war between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman, the seed of the line of the Antichrist and the line of the true Messiah, then we are going to be able to trace this through all the scriptures. And we are going to gain a lot of valuable intel on the spiritual war in which we are involved. Satan has an absolute enmity against God and against the messianic line and the people of the messianic line and everybody who defends the people of the messianic line and everybody who embraces, owns, and follows the Messiah. He absolutely hates them because those things spell his destruction. Now, I want to point out a little bit more here that there's a seed war going on, and we need to enter into the seed war. We need to understand this seed war. This is a very significant point. And I also want to point out that what we see here in Genesis 3:15 is essentially a prophecy of Genesis 6 and the problem that it's going to introduce. Now, in this seed war between the serpent seed line and the messianic line, God is continually restraining the serpent seed line. He's restraining it, he's containing it, he's slowing it, he's hindering it so that it can't do its evil work until the last days when God has designed for it to happen. This is the work of the restrainer. This is restraining the mystery of iniquity. Now, if you, on the opposite side, excuse me, got a little bit of something in my throat. On the opposite, wow. On the opposite side, we have the serpent line and the serpent trying to stop the messianic line. We see this over and over again in the scriptures. We see evil King Athaliah try and slay the royal line so that there will not be a Messiah. There won't be someone to sit on David's throne. We see Pharaoh slaying all the Egyptian youth, trying to put a stop to Israel before Israel can even really get started on producing the messianic line. We see Herod just prior to the appearance of the Messiah, well, actually, when the Messiah was a child, slaying all the children in Israel, the males, not in all of Israel, but in the area of the birth of the Messiah, trying to stop the messianic line. So the serpent line is trying to stop the messianic line, and the serpent is trying to stop the messianic line, and the messianic line is resisting the serpent line, and the Messiah is hindering and restraining the serpent line so it can't bring forth the final version of the serpent seed in the last days, whom we know as the Antichrist, until it's time for the Antichrist to be revealed. Lastly, I want to point out that this seed war is going to come to a head. It's been engaged now for nearly 6,000 years. It keeps engaging. It's changed in a few ways. Its dynamics of the battle have changed, but the principles are the same. It's going to come to a head at the end of the age when the false Messiah comes and rails against the true Messiah, and then the true Messiah is going to descend from heaven, crush the false Messiah, and establish his kingdom on earth. Now, in slide 6 here, we see the highlights of the seed war. Now, when did the seed lines begin? Well, the messianic line started with Seth. And it went through there, down through the generations, down to the time of the flood, through Noah, and then through Shem, and then through Shem's descendants to Abraham, down to David. And then with David, through his line, we have the Messiah coming forth. And then after that, well, of course, the line still continues, but the seed that's going to sit on the throne and be the Messiah, once he was born, then you don't need to follow that line out to the Messiah anymore. So the messianic line began with Seth. Now the serpent line began a little later, in the time, somewhere's probably in the time of Lamech, in the line of Ham, with the angelic incursion. And I do want to point out here, when we look at this seed war, there needs to be some sort of parity or analogy between the seed of the woman, who's the Messiah, and the seed of the serpent. The seed of the woman is from the seed line of the godly line, or the seed of the woman line. There's a woman who the Holy Spirit shadowed over her, hovered over her. She had a virgin birth. She, as a virgin, conceived and gave birth as a virgin to the Messiah. Now, there's a similar thing going on with the serpent line. The serpent is having his line continue through history. Somewhere along in there, someone in the serpent line, a woman in the serpent line, is going to conceive at the hand of Satan himself, or one of his spirit representatives, and give birth to the Antichrist, who will worship nobody but himself and Satan himself. Now, so you see there's an analogy between the lines. So let's go back to when the seed line begins. It starts with Seth for the messianic line, starts with Lamech in the line of Ham for the serpent line. Now, when did the chosen ones appear? The Messiah appeared at his incarnation about 2,000 years ago. And he had his earthly ministry, he had his death, he had his resurrection. He's seated in heaven now, waiting for his second coming. The Antichrist is going to appear at the end of this age with his incarnation in ministry. And what a battle that's going to be in the last days. This appearance of the Antichrist we read in 2 Thessalonians 2 is a great delusion sent by God as a judgment upon the world. Now, when we look at some of the unbelief that we see in the world right now, especially in those that are 40 and under, it's absolutely mind-blowing, shocking. It's difficult to believe that anyone can be so brain dead in their unbelief. But this is the beginning of the delusion that God is sending upon man, because they refuse to believe the truth. They refuse to believe the gospel truth. They refuse to believe the truth in the testimony of nature and science. They refuse to believe the truth in the sense of just plain common sense. They've just completely shut their eyes to light. Now, when are the chosen ones going to meet their demise? Well, the Messiah will never meet his demise, but the false Messiah will meet his demise at the second coming. Now, A couple other things I want to point out here. We read in Genesis 3:15 that the seed of the woman is going to have a bruised heel. And we read that the seed of the serpent is going to have a bruised head. This is a temporary injury for Christ at the cross. This is the bruised heel. It's just a temporary injury. Nothing significant, except for that it pays for our redemption. But it's not fatal. Not in the ultimate sense. It's only fatal in a temporary sense. But the bruised head, the Antichrist, is going to receive a permanent fatal wound. There's no resurrection, there's no return. He is going to be crushed at the second coming. Now, here I don't have much to say on this. I just love this picture. This is from Dore's ancient pictures. He did these with sketches. And this one here is a picture of David with holding up the head of Goliath. Now, I love this because this is a typology of the Messiah slaying the Antichrist. Now, this, of course, when we view things from the eyes of the regenerated, who've been illuminated by the Word of God, who have a renewed mind, we don't quite understand this picture. All we just see is a giant getting slain by a godly person. But when you understand that this is portraying things from the perspective of the man on the street, then you realize what it's going to look like when the Messiah comes down from heaven and slays the Antichrist, because the world's going to be gathered against the Antichrist. And they're going to think that he is invincible in the same way that the Philistines thought that Goliath was invincible. And once the Antichrist is slain, the world's armies are going to be dismayed the same way that the Philistines were dismayed when Goliath was slain. They didn't expect it. They didn't see it coming. They thought that David was an upstart. The world at the end of the age is going to think that whoever this dude is that's descending from heaven, he's just some upstart from another solar system in another galaxy, thinks he's going to come down here and take over planet Earth, and they got another thing coming because nobody can defeat mankind. Well, that's going to be proven to be extremely empty in short order. And so from the world's perspective, their hero, which they thought was invincible, will be slain by a nobody from somewhere else. And think about the picture too from this perspective. David was an above average man who was hidden in an average body, with average looks, in an average working class family, in an average village, in a backwater nation. And this is exactly what the Lord Jesus Christ is from a human perspective. He's an above average man, hidden in an average body, with average looks, comes from an average working class family, in an average village, in a backwater nation. And this is the one that God has chosen to rule the world. And folks, I want you to be encouraged by this in your own ways too, because many of you, in fact, most of us that labor in the work of God, we've come from pretty humble places. We don't have a lot of advantages. We always feel like we're laboring with, we don't have the tools we'd like to have. We don't have the time we'd like to have. We don't have the strength we'd like to have. There's just a lot that we'd like to have that we don't have. And we're coming in the work of God, not really able to boast about ourselves. And all we have that we can boast in is the truth of God, the Word of God, and the Son of God, and God Himself, and the power of the Holy Spirit, the indwelling Holy Spirit. So take heart. Well, let's look at the next slide, the 3 layers of the seed war. Notice we have the first layer is the serpent line versus mankind in general. The second is the serpent line versus the messianic line. And the third is the false Messiah versus the true Messiah. Now, when we look at the serpent line versus mankind, I want you to think about that verse in John 10 where it says the thief only comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, we all know that the verse is abused by some in certain charismatic and Pentecostal circles. That's okay. Let them abuse it if they're going to go down that path. But don't throw the verse out just because some abuse it. The fact is, this is what the devil does. He does come to steal, kill, and destroy. He's doing a very great job of it. He's stolen and killed and destroyed in your life, in your family, in your circle of friends, in your church. And he does this everywhere in the world. And the elite who are in the serpent line follow in the footsteps of the devil. They exploit, they dominate, they defile, they rob of blessing, they rob of freedom. They pretend through, well, today they're pretending through social media, through Madison Avenue advertising, through politics, through education. They pretend that they care about you. But folks, their real goal is to dominate you, to milk you. Ultimately, you are nothing but a serf that you work for them, and they'll let you have a little bit to live off of, but they're milking you all day long, 24/7, 365. And you've got several layers of this milking process in the world. This is the serpent line versus mankind. They don't actually care about your health. They don't actually care about your wealth, except to the degree that they can let you gain enough wealth to make them wealthier. Now, we also see the serpent line in particular directed against the messianic line. God is going to curb the serpent line. And he's been curbing the serpent line. He curbed the serpent line with the flood. He curbed the serpent line at Babel. He curbed the serpent line in Canaan. He's been curbing the serpent line ever since. And he's going to curb it until he lets it loose at the second coming. On the other hand, the serpent line has been trying over and over again to stop the messianic line and the chosen people. Now, when we come to the last level, which is the false Messiah versus the true Messiah, we see that we have God's supernatural human versus Satan's supernatural human. And I pointed out earlier, and I want to reemphasize this. I want to make sure that you all catch this. The seed of the serpent must bear an analogy with the seed of the woman. As Christ is the offspring of the Holy Spirit who hovered over a woman who is a pure human being of the line of Eve, the line of the woman, so the false Messiah will be the offspring of Satan, come unto a woman of the tainted Nephilim line, the tainted human line. There's going to be an analogy here. So in other words, what we're looking at here is we have a little g God manifest in serpent seed flesh. That's the Antichrist. I want you to think about that. A little g God manifest in serpent seed flesh versus God manifest in pure human flesh. So the Messiah was born from a woman who was 100% true human being, and she was in the messianic line. The Antichrist is going to be born of someone in the tainted Nephilim line, who's of the serpent seed line, and she will be tainted, Nephilim. And then she will have relations with the devil himself or with one of his spirit representatives. So let's move on to slide 9. We're going to look at the analogy between the two seeds. I've already pointed out, and I'll point it, I just want to keep this point before you. There must be an analogy between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman. Satan's incarnation must emulate Jesus's incarnation. Satan is the great ape and he imitates Christ. This is little g God manifest in serpent seed flesh versus big G God manifest in pure human flesh. All right, the three outbreaks of the serpent seed. There's a first outbreak was prior to the flood. We see this in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, and that was answered in the flood or addressed in the flood. We had a second outbreak after the flood. This was addressed or answered in the Canaanite extermination effort. We had a third outbreak that's coming. It's going to be in the last days, and it will come to a head at the second coming. Now, we've had several outbreaks, two past and one future. But there's been a continual presence through the whole time. And we're going to go into that. Just don't confuse it, because it wasn't like there was one appearance and it was absolutely gone, nothing's left. A second appearance and absolutely gone, nothing's left. And then a third appearance and it's absolutely gone. And there will be absolutely gone the last time, but the first two times it was not absolutely gone. We will go into that here in a minute. Now, one thing I want to point out, we have the second appearance or the second outbreaking of the Nephilim after the flood. We see this in the Canaanites, and we're going to look at some verses here in a moment to prove or demonstrate this point. Now, a lot of people think that this second time was a second incursion, so the angels came down to earth from heaven a second time. That might well be the truth, but we don't have to go there to explain the second intrusion. Now, personally, I think that the second intrusion is less likely. The reason I think so is when that first incursion from heaven, those angels were bound and cast into outer darkness. They paid an insane price. And to me, I think that would convince other angels not to do that again a second time, because they don't want to go to the chains of darkness and outer darkness early. They want to hang on as long as they can. They want to extend their time where they're free. So I'm inclined to think that the second outbreak after the flood comes because the wives of Ham and Japheth were tainted. We only see great outbreaks of the Nephilim's problem and the giants in the line of Japheth and in the line of Ham. We don't see it in the line of Shem. Now, Shem, Ham, and Japheth themselves had to be pure. And Noah had to be pure, otherwise Noah wouldn't be pure in his generations, and Noah's wife had to be pure, or there wouldn't be pure in their generations. You need to have that for the Semitic line to be pure. Now, since this outbreak after the flood, we read in several of the ancient writings, Jewish and secular, that the Nephilim were chased out of the land of Canaan by the Jews, and they fled. Some of them were slain and others fled. And those that fled primarily to North America and fled to South America, and some fled east to the mountains in like the Afghanistan region. Now, this flight across the ocean has been portrayed in some folklore. It's been portrayed, for instance, as the elves sailing across the ocean in the Lord of the Rings series. And this concept is found deeper in ancient literature. It's not just a mere invention in the Lord of the Rings. Now, since this expulsion, that wasn't the end of all the serpent seed line. That was the end of the line as far as the giants were concerned. There's several other aspects of the serpent line. We'll maybe look at this a little bit deeper later on in the presentation. I'll just point out now that you have basically three sets of traits in the serpent seed. You have the traits of the giants with giant size and stature and strength. You have the traits of giants in the sense of intellectual and spiritual capacity, who make the great rulers. And you have the Nephilim line in the sense of odd traits, like the cone head, the misplaced foramen, the 6 fingers, 6 toes, 2 rows of teeth, and other odd things. What's interesting is there's very little of the giant line left. And here and there we see scattered remnants of the odd traits, like the 2 rows of teeth and the 6 fingers and the 6 toes. This is all pretty much insignificant. What's significant is the line that we call the blue bloods, going down the Illuminati type lines. These have basically bred out all the odd traits and all the gigantic traits, so they mix in well with humanity. They're hidden in plain view, and they have extreme abilities on the intellectual plane and the spiritual plane. Now, anyway, I think in the last days, this blue bloodline is going to be enhanced with DNA alteration for various purposes. And I think this is the primary reason for the DNA research that's been going in the direction it's been going, with trying to reconfigure and manipulate DNA and mRNA. And it's why we have government interest in Nephilim and giant remains, in the hopes to extract DNA that they can use. Now, with these 3 outbreaks, there's 3 different exterminations. The first outbreak before the flood was brought to virtual extinction in the flood. It was either brought to a complete extinction with the second incursion, or it was brought to near virtual extinction with the tainted bloodlines in the wives of Ham and Japheth. When we come to the Canaanite extermination, after the bloodlines rose up again and there were giants all across the land of Canaan, many were wiped out and many others fled. Those that fled to North America and South America, and in both places the giants came to their end over many centuries. There's many North American and South American Indian tales, Native American tales about their fighting with the giants and their elimination of the giants. In fact, with some tribes like the Sioux, they talk about the star people who came down from the heavens, who were of exceptional stature and who ruled in North America for a long time until they were exterminated. When we come to the second coming, that extermination is going to be complete. God is going to, in between the resurrection and the judgments at the second coming, there will be no more serpent line here on earth. It will be completely done with. And what a blessing that's going to be. So let's move on to the next slide. Which is Genesis 6, verses 1, 2, and 4. Now it came to pass, when men began to multiply in the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful. And they took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. And there were giants in the earth in those days, and also afterwards, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men, and they bore children to them. Those were the mighty men who were of old, men of renown. Now, do yourself a favor sometime, if you haven't done this yet. Do a word search in the Old Testament for the phrase, the sons of God. And you're going to discover that in the Old Testament, it's used of the direct creations of God. The angels, the sons of God. Now, when we come to the New Testament, we see the sons of God used for those who are directly created by God with the new birth, And that's going to be finished in the resurrection. They have the right to become the children of God or the sons of God. So men are not the sons of God merely by dint of being born a human being. Angels were, by the very fact of immediate creation, the sons of God. So if you can enter into this, men are going to be the sons of God in the future, above the angels. But anyway, here we have the sons of God or the fallen angels. The fallen angels saw the sons of God, saw they were beautiful. They took for them wives, and they were giants in those days. They were giants when the sons of God came into the daughters of men and bore children to them. It's a very, very fascinating passage. Now let's look at another passage on this subject. And this is the evidence for this first outbreak. The mythologies all around the world, from the Greeks, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Mayas, the Native Americans, the Chinese, all these cultures around the world have ancient tales that have the gods coming down to mankind and giving them technology. And they taught them the art of war. They introduced exploitative economics. They started empire building. This happened before the flood and led to the judgment at the flood. It's happened again after the flood. And all over the place, we find giant humanoid footprints in high-tech megalithic ruins that seem to predate the flood. We find giant human footprints alongside dinosaur tracks. And these things predate the flood. Now, let's look at the flood and demons. This is an interesting point for a lot of people because they struggle with the difference between angels and demons. And they appear to be different, but they're not exactly sure how to explain the difference. Now, the Nephilim, who are part angel and part human, perished in the flood. I mentioned earlier that the Nephilim, because they were part human and part angel, they weren't really they couldn't really be sent to the place where angels are sent. They're going to have their own place apparently in the future. They couldn't go to the normal holding place where the human beings are held. And they were allowed apparently to just perish in the flood, but because they were half angel and half man, they've got this spirit existence that when their body dies, they're not dead. Like when a human being dies, that spirit is going to be stored somewhere. It's going to be stored in Hades. But with these fallen angels that mingled with man, and they brought forth the Nephilim, those Nephilim continue to wander the earth as the fallen demons when they perished in the flood. Now, many ancient authors, the patristic authors, the ancient Jewish authors, the even ancient Roman and Greek authors mention this story of how the demons came into existence. They talk about them being beings that existed prior to the flood and they're still wandering the earth. Now, whether or not we embrace this explanation, it certainly seems obvious that fallen angels and demons are different creatures. Personally, I find the flood explanation to be the most satisfying explanation for the existence of demons, because demons and angels are actually very different. In fact, we're going to look at a couple of these points. Angels have a bodily form that they are confined to. When the angels in heaven, it says they left their first habitation, they left their existence that they were supposed to maintain, and they came down to earth in human form. They cohabited with women. They were bound in outer darkness before the final day of judgment, and they're kept there for the final day of judgment. Now, Nephilim don't have bodies they're confined to. The demons don't have bodies they're confined to. A demon can leave a human and go to a dog or a cat or another animal or another human. They can wander around not having a body to enter into. They're not bound to a body, where angels are bound to their body. And the demons are seeking to inhabit. They apparently have no access to heaven, where the angels have access to heaven. And the demons need a place to live, and they live in living creatures, especially human beings. Now let's look at the second outbreak of the serpent seed. Genesis 6:4. There were giants in the earth in those days and again afterwards. Now, when it talks about those days, we're in context that's really right coming up to the flood. And so it just is natural to think that again afterwards means after the flood. Not necessarily immediately after the flood, but after the flood. The grammar and the context seem to demand an post-flood outbreak. I think it's pretty clear from biblical history and from secular history that there was a visible, well-known, undeniable outbreak of giants or Nephilim again after the flood. And we're going to look at some of that evidence. So the next slide, when I bring it up, I'm going to show you the historical record of the second outbreak. And we find this lot of evidence in the Old Testament. Again, there's more evidence in the Old Testament than most people imagine. So let's see here, slide 15. Oh, I accidentally scrolled past the slide. So here's the first two outbreaks. I want you to understand that the first outbreak prior to the flood and the second outbreak after the flood involved the giants that Israel was fighting in the land of Canaan. These were not conspiracies that were kept under wraps, and you didn't know about it unless you were reading the Conspiracy Files magazine or going to conspiracy programs on YouTube. This stuff was in plain view. They weren't conspiracy theories lampooned by the mainstream media, and there wasn't conspiracy theories you'd only find on late night radio or in the National Enquirer. They were visible. They were undeniable. They were unmistakable outbreaks of giants with exceptional intelligence, exceptional power, and they dominated man wherever they went. They were seen by the left and the right alike. They were seen by the great and the small alike. They dominated everybody. Well, what this implies is that the third outbreak in the future is going to be just as visible, just as obvious, and just as undeniable. You know, I want you to notice another thing. Enoch departed quite a long time prior to the flood. And he departed before the great full outbreak that led to the flood. I suspect it's going to be the same thing here. The church is going to depart before the full outbreak in the last days. Now, I mentioned this again. I want to mention it. I mentioned it before. I do want to mention it again. The first outbreak met a catastrophic judgment in the flood. The second outbreak met a providential restraint and maintenance that basically put the giant line out of business, and just left scattered traits for all the odd traits amongst mankind, especially from the northern Europeans and Germans. And the secret line of the world rulers is still ensconced in Europe and the colonies that came from Europe, like Canada, America, Australia, and New Zealand. The third outbreak is going to meet catastrophic judgment, just like the first one in the flood did. So let's move on to slide 16. Was there two distinct incursions or just one incursion? In other words, does again afterwards demand two incursions so that after the flood, another group of angels came down and cohabited with women a second time? Or does the grammar and wording allow two outbreaks from just one incursion that was prior to the flood? Now, I think the grammar and the translations allow a second incursion, and that might actually prove to be the truth. But the grammar and the translations don't demand a second incursion. They only demand a second outbreak that only necessitates a further occurrence of the Nephilim problem. Now, I paraphrase Genesis, this passage in Genesis, as when the sons of God married the daughters of men, that led to the fact that then there were giants at that time and another time later on. So let's look at some of the record from the Bible at the second outbreak. Numbers 13:33. There we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, are part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our sight, and so we were in their sight. In other words, when they looked up, they felt like grasshoppers in the presence of the Anaks, the sons of Anak. They're not talking here about men that were 8 and 9 feet tall. They would describe themselves as midgets if they were dealing with people that tall. They're talking about people that made them look and feel like grasshoppers. And the sons of Anak regarded them as grasshoppers in their sight. We see a similar thing in Deuteronomy chapter 2, 20 through 21. The Zamzummim among the Ammonites, great, tall like the Anakim. In Deuteronomy 2, 10 through 11, the Amim among the Moabites, giants like the Anakim. Amos 2, 9 through 10, Amorites, tall as cedars and sturdy as oaks. Now, we found quite a few remains, not we as far as me and a few friends, but we as far as believing archaeologists and secular archaeologists that don't know what to do with it. We have found remains fairly common, 10 to 12 feet tall. There's reports of some that go up to 16 feet or taller. It's difficult to verify those taller ones, but if we trust the testimony of Scripture, there were obviously folks that were 16 to 20 feet tall or taller, going down the paths of the ancient fairy tales, which are remnants of truth. In 2 Samuel 21:22, we read, these four were born to the Rapha, the giant in Gath, and fell by the hand of David and by the hand of his servants. And this is talking about the Rephaim. So this is simply a statement of historical fact that there were giants. So we either take the plain statements of Scripture that there were giants who were the sons of Anak, who called them the Nephilim, or we don't. Personally, I feel that I'm obligated to take these statements at face value. Now, in slide 18 here, there's historical record for the second outbreak that happened after the flood. In the Ugaritic records, we read of a Rephaim ruling class who were called gods. In fact, all over in ancient history, In the ancient mythologies and the ancient historical records, we read about gods who came down from heaven. We read about a ruling class that came down from heaven. We read about the star people that came down from heaven. All over in the ancient records, the post-flood giants were gods. Now, these Nephilim fled across the ocean, according to authors like Procopius, and they went to North America and South America after Joshua's conquest of Canaan. All over North America, there's Native American traditions and tales that talk about defeating the giants. It took them many centuries. These giants were cannibals. They were extremely tall. Many of them were twice as tall or taller than a human being. They had red hair and red beards and blue eyes, and they were insanely massive. And this gigantic size existed well past the time of Christ in Europe, so that the Roman Emperor Maximinus Thrax was 8'6" tall. Now, the Roman measurements were a little bit bigger than our measurements. So he would have been closer to like 8 feet 9 or 10 inches in modern measurements. He was a ruler from, well, his life was from like 173 to 238, give or take a year. But he was so big, they had a hard time finding a horse big enough for him to ride. And he was undefeated as a gladiator. When you look at Egyptian history, the pharaohs were Nephilim all the way down to the time of Tutankhamun. And when you look at the pictures of Tutankhamun, you'll see that he has a cone head. And when you look at the pictures of ancient emperors, many of them show the cone head structure. They were Nephilim. They were the ruling class. Now, a lot of people struggle with the explanation for post-flood giants. It's not uncommon in the academic world in evangelical circles to profess to believe in the Nephilim prior to the flood, but not want to believe in the Nephilim after the flood. And in my mind, if you go down that path and you believe in the Nephilim prior to the flood and you reject the Nephilim after the flood, you don't really have a way to account for the giants that lived after the flood. How do you explain merely on the basis of human genes, men that were 10, 12 feet tall, men that were 8'6" tall? I mean, we've had a couple people in relatively recent history go high in the 7-foot, push the low 8-foot range. But these men had a problem known as gigantism, which is a problem in their glandular system. And they were not normally proportioned human beings. They were very tall and very lanky, and they had health issues. The true Nephilim giants were proportioned like well-built athletes. They were insanely powerful. They were normally proportioned. In fact, some of them were abnormally proportioned the other way. So if you reject a second outbreak of the Nephilim after the flood, you don't really have any real good way to explain the giants that existed after the flood. Here's another interesting thought. I'm just going to throw it out there for you to consider. Tradition says that Alexander the Great was born of a liaison between his mother and a serpent. I just want you to think about that. I think that you can make a good argument that from the Greek Empire forwards and from the Roman Empire forwards, many of the leaders were of the Nephilim lines. These are the same lines that dominate Europe today, through royal families and through the wealthy inherited families, through the Illuminati families. And wouldn't that be interesting to get to heaven and find out that this isn't just a cool story to build up Alexander's reputation, but that his mother actually did have a relationship with the serpent spirit? Well, let's move on to the next slide, slide 19. The third and final outbreak, which is coming in the future. Genesis 3:15 says the seed of the serpent who will be crushed. So he's going to be crushed at the end of the age. He's not here yet. The serpent line is here. The seed line of the serpent is here. Now, it might be, if we're deep enough in the end of the age, that this final seed of the serpent, the Antichrist, he's already alive. We might have already seen him with our own eyes, and maybe he's hiding off in a dark corner, waiting to be revealed by the deep state. Now, we also read in Daniel 2:43, when it's talking about the 10 toes of the 10 kings, it refers to them that their seed doesn't mix with the seed of men. I want you to go back and look at that passage and study it closely in Daniel chapter 2 and think about it, because it's not merely talking about the iron that doesn't mingle with the clay. It's also talking about a seed problem where, just like the iron and the clay don't mix, so the seed of the 10 kings doesn't mix with the seed of men. This implies that the 10 kings that are appointed to rule with the Antichrist in the last days are not merely yes men from the human ranks. They are yes men from the blue blood or Illuminati lines that are spread primarily in Europe and North America and Australia. So I just want you to think about that. The 10 toes, their seed doesn't mix with the seed of men. We also read about the mysterious kings of the earth in the last days in Isaiah chapter 24, verses 21 through 23. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and read that passage. I'm going to bring it up here on my e-sword. And here we read, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth. I want you to think about that. And they shall be gathered together as prisoners gathered in the pit, and shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days they shall be visited. Then the moon shall be confounded, and the sun ashamed, when the Lord of hosts shall reign in Mount Zion and in Jerusalem, and before his ancients gloriously. Now, these kings of the earth are put in the same general category with the hosts of the high ones are on high. I'm inclined to think the hosts of the high ones are on high are the fallen angels that are ruling the earth, the true deep state, and that the kings of the earth that are talking about here are the Nephilim blue bloods here on earth. They are the deep state. It says they'll be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, so they're put in the same category, and they're going to be shut up in prison. Now, up to this point, we might be able to make a case that these kings of the earth are just extremely wicked human beings. However, I want you to notice, after many days they shall be visited. This is telling us, I believe this is referring to the fact that the angels and the angelic realm is going to be released again after the 1,000 years. So when the full angels are released and Satan is released at the end of the 1,000 years, I think the Nephilim ranks and the demonic ranks are also going to be released at the end of the 1,000 years. They will be part of the stirring up that last rebellion. And because it says after many days they shall be visited, I think this precludes them or excludes them from being pure human beings. It implies that they are Nephilim. Now, also, it's amazing, on the day that these are gathered in the pit, it's the second coming, on the day that the moon is confounded and the sun is ashamed, and the day the Lord of hosts will reign gloriously in Mount Zion. Now let's go back and look at the seed of the serpent one more time in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15. I will put enmity between you and the woman, and between your seed and her seed. He shall bruise your head, and you shall bruise his heel. So the false Messiah is going to be crushed at the second coming. And there's got to be an analogy between the incarnation of the messianic seed and the seed of the serpent. We've been through that a couple times already. We need to have the serpent line have an intervention with the false god that brings about a son or here on earth that will be the Antichrist. This there's no human male involved with the Messiah, and I don't believe there's a human male involved with the Antichrist. As the Spirit of God hovered over a pure human, so Satan or an immediate representative is going to impregnate a woman who's of the watered down Nephilim line. On the basis of this verse alone, I am convinced that there are Nephilim lines in the world. You can't really trace this Genesis 3:15 all the way through Scripture and take it at face value and really talk about a seed line of the serpent and really have it mean anything unless there's not a seed line of the serpent here amongst human beings on earth. One that's continued from the first incursion, snuck through on the ark, continued until an outbreak in the land of Canaan, and then that outbreak was crushed. It continued in the northern lands, it continued in North and South America, and it ultimately found its final form in the nations that are of the Roman Empire. So we got these Nephilim lines yet in the globe. Now, there's another interesting thing I want to point out here. We talked about this already. I'm going to go deeper into it. Daniel chapter 2, verses 43 and 44. The seed lines don't mingle. Notice that here we read, as you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they shall mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. So notice that uses the points out that is iron doesn't mix with clay, so the seed line of the serpent is not going to mingle with the seed of men. They're not going to adhere to one another. This points to the Genesis 3:15 problem, and it's a prophecy for the last days, even to the days of the 10 kings. So I like to point out, just as European democracy and fundamentalist Islam don't mix well, that's the iron in the clay. The iron is the European nations and their colonies that they founded that are still connected to them in directly or indirectly. And fundamentalist Islam is those nations in the Middle East, and in North Africa, that they're the clay. They continually causing problems for the iron, and they don't mix in the same way that these don't mix very well at all. So the leadership of the serpent lines, which is going to manifest itself in the 10 toes, that leadership does not mix with human seed very well at all. Now, this serpent line appears to be largely extinct or virtually extinct in most of the world, but it still is dominating in the deep state in Western Europe and in the colonies of Europe, like America, Canada, Australia. So Isaiah 24, 21 through 23, we have the binding of the final kings. And it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall punish the host of the high ones that are on high, and the kings of the earth upon the earth, and they shall be gathered together as prisoners are gathered in the pit, and they shall be shut up in the prison, and after many days they shall be visited. I want to point out here that Hebrew parallelism is one of your best friends for interpretation. Both groups are imprisoned at the second coming, and both groups are visited after the millennium. I already brought that up, but I want to point it out again in this text. There's a connection between the high ones on high, which I believe are the pure angels that are fallen, and the kings of the earth upon the earth, which are the Nephilim ruling class. Now, we no longer have Nephilim that are 12 feet tall that are ruling the world. They became extinct in South America and North America and Canaan. There's rumors that there's still a few in Afghanistan and areas like that. That might be true. But the ruling class that's in the deep state, they look like human beings. They have bred out the giant traits. They have bred out, I believe they intentionally bred out the giant traits and the oddity traits. They bred out the 2 rows of teeth, bred out 6 fingers and toes, bred out the cone heads, bred out everything else. They look like human beings, but they maintained the traits of the Nephilim that they wanted to maintain. So let's move on to slide 23. We're getting close to being done here. Only got a few more left. Now there's 2 outbreak theories. I follow the gene pool theory, where I believe there was one original cohabitation, there was genetic consolidation after the flood. Some of the ancient tales seem to imply that there might have been something along the lines of magic or involvement of the angels in the demonic realm to help people along, but there was genetic consolidation. When we come to the last days, it's going to become even more sophisticated and involve genetic manipulation. Now, the other theory for the 3 outbreaks is that there's a continual cohabitation theory. There was a cohabitation before the flood, there's a cohabitation after the flood, and there'll be a cohabitation again at the end. Now, we might see some cohabitation at the end. I think there's evidence that we may well be seeing that, but they know their time is short. But I think that really probably the best way to look at this is that the gene pool theory is the basic theory. And then in the last days, we also have this influx or inflow of the cohabitation again. Now, I'm not defending either theory in the sense I think one is absolutely true and the other one's to be rejected. But I do favor the latter theory, the gene pool theory. And I don't think we can exclude every element that belongs in the cohabitation theory either, because we definitely had cohabitation before the flood, and there's good evidence to believe that we're seeing cohabitation now. L.A. Marzulli's work brings this out very clearly, and it certainly seems with the seed war teaching from Genesis 3:15 that there has to definitely be a cohabitation for the Antichrist, and that's probably already history. Now, no matter which way we go with using these theories in some combination or other to explain the 3 outbreaks, that exercises our thinking and our discernment quite a bit. But the fact is, no matter how we explain it, the 3 outbreaks are true. Whether you explain it with 3 distinct cohabitations, or whether you explain it with a pure gene pool theory, or whether you explain it with a little bit of mix, the fact is we've got reasonable explanations for the 3 manifestations, and we know it's a historical fact. We had a manifestation before the flood. It's a historical fact we had a manifestation after the flood. It seems to be pretty conclusive that we still have existence of the blue blood lines today, the Nephilim lines today, who are the deep state. And we see evidence that there's going to be another cohabitation manifestation in the last days. So let me break down the gene pool theory a little bit more. This is the theory I run with for my base theory. The first outbreak method was an angelic incursion. The fallen angels came down, they inhabited with women, they married them. This is just a plain statement of scripture in Genesis 6:1-4. The second outbreak was genetic consolidation of genetic defilement in the ark that was in the wives of Ham and Japheth. And the third outbreak is primarily genetic manipulation and enhancement in the last days. And folks, we are already seeing this. We are seeing this. And in this third outbreak, we are definitely appear to be seeing cohabitation once again, maybe to raise up an army of Nephilim. And we also are going to see the cohabitation of the Antichrist himself, and that may actually be history. Now, I think some people have too narrow of a view on the Nephilim problem. Some look at it as a problem that only was before the flood, and they don't think it happened again after the flood, much less continuing through history. And they look at it like the giants died out in the flood, and they try and ignore the giants after the flood or explain them away. But I think the fact is there's been an intentional program of genetic isolation. This intentional program of genetic isolation has bred out the gigantic traits. It's bred out the odd traits, and it's maintained the elite traits. And I think that the Nephilim historically and contemporarily are tampering with nature, and they're mixing species. So understand that genetic engineering is Nephilim manifestation. That's Nephilim agenda. Mixing species. We see this mixing in ancient history and mythology. It's the fallen realm tampering with God's creation and defiling it for their own evil purposes. And we see this going on today in the modern scientific realm. So we are currently in the time of the third outbreak. Though it's not yet fully manifested, I don't believe it's going to be fully manifested until after the rapture. So we're coming up here to the conclusion. I've got 2 more slides. In conclusion, there's 3 strands of spiritual warfare. We've got the pure angelic strand, we've got the demonic strand, which are the Nephilim from prior to the flood, and then we have the Nephilimic thread, which is still ongoing today, and it's the deep state, and they're in their own breeding programs and genetic manipulation programs. We have 3 occasions of Nephilim outbreak: pre-flood, post-flood, and the end times. And from Genesis to Revelation, from the garden to the second coming, the Nephilim problem has plagued mankind. The Nephilim spirit dominates mankind. They defile mankind, they defile creation, and they diss God. But God is going to right everything in the time of the restitution of all things. So that concludes my presentation, folks. This is, I don't think I told you this, but this is essentially the presentation I gave at the Prophecy Watchers Conference on the Nephilim in Colorado Springs. I just threw in a little bit more commentary here tonight and went a little longer with it. I was limited to about 50 minutes there. So, eyes wide open, brain engaged, and heart on fire. We are going to see you next time for the next live stream. But at this point, I'm not going to shut things down. We'll go into some Q&A. I did want to bring up one other point, and I didn't know where to put it in my notes, and I'll probably eventually find a good slot for it as I work through my notes a few more times and streamline things a little better. But there's been a debate whether Nephilim means fallen ones or giants. And so you'll have authors, author will line up and say, I think it means fallen ones. And brothers like Michael Heiser will say, no, when you look at the Aramaic or the Syriac, it means giants. Well, actually, I think these are both true, folks. The original sense, if we're going to go back to the oldest documentation, I think we're going to go back to the Hebrew in Genesis 6 is probably the oldest source, and that would give us the root sense of fallen ones. However, words often change meanings. And so Nephilim, because the Nephilim were largely gigantic in their stature and heroic in their nature, they were the word came to mean giants because the Nephilim were giants. They were giants in their stature. They were giants in their, not in their good character, but giants in their bad character. They were giants in their stature. They were giants because they were heroes. And so the term Nephilim came to have the sense of giant. This is why when we come into the later Aramaic and Syriac writings, Nephilim is used for giant. So I think both senses are true. We just have to figure out where we are in the flow of history. All right, let's pull up our questions here. Oh, we got quite a bit of questions. Okay, doke. Why do some people believe the descendants of Seth were those sons of God? Well, most of the early church fathers, up until about the 4th century, held to the understanding, same as we do, that the sons of God were the angels, and they just took the scriptures at face value. The sons of God or the angels came down and cohabited with women. But this seems so bizarre to a lot of people. And when people go in the direction of churchianity rather than biblical Christianity, they move in the direction of religion. They don't want a bunch of supernatural stuff getting in their way. They particularly don't want to have a biblical understanding of demons and a biblical understanding of fallen angels and a biblical understanding of Nephilim. And so they had to look for an alternative explanation. The alternative explanation is that the godly line was the sons of God, and the ungodly line was the seed of man or the seed of the woman. And so you've got these two lines mixing, but to me it doesn't make any sense because yeah, you're trying to avoid a supernatural element that you're uncomfortable with, but how do you explain the giants? How do you explain some of the things we read about in ancient history? It fails to provide an explanation. So I think they're just intimidated by their religious peers, and so they're afraid to embrace the truth. Question: could there be any Nephilim DNA in those pulling the Soros, Schwab, WHO, World Economic Forum, DNC strings, etc., whose names we do not know? Well, I think we have at least the experts on the subject have a fairly good handle on some of the main family names that have been in the Illuminati and the secret societies for many centuries. Some of them they can trace way back towards the time of Christ, trace them back to Roman families and Greek families. And yes, I do think that these in the background are pulling the strings. I think people like Soros and Schwab and the World Economic Forum and the World Health Organization, these people largely are just puppets. We might have some of them have some Nephilim blood in them. It would be hard to know. But ultimately, we know that this spirit, regardless of what we can pinpoint for details, this spirit is what's dominating the world. Question directly to Lee. When you were a post-tribber, what did you believe was the main purpose of the church facing the Antichrist? Well, simply that I saw in Matthew 24 that there were saints in the tribulation, and I didn't understand a clear distinction between Israel and the church. I didn't understand that God, according to Romans 11, was going to fulfill his promises made to Israel in the Old Testament, and that they were going to be restored. I didn't understand the Old Testament clearly, much less believe it at face value. And so therefore I was obligated, because there are saints in the tribulation, I was obligated to believe that that was a church. And of course, there needs to be saints in tribulation to glorify the Lord. That's just the way it works. The saints in tribulation in the church age glorify God, especially when we submit humbly to following a crucified, rejected Messiah in a world that hates the Messiah they crucified. And so that same principle that we follow in the church age, it still applies to the saints in the tribulation, whether those saints are church saints or tribulation saints. So it's simply the fact of glorifying God is the main purpose of any saints that are going to face the Antichrist, whether they're church or whether they're Israel. I think they will be Israel. Question: do I think anything will happen around September 23rd, the 7-year anniversary of the Revelation 12 sign? Folks, I do not put a lot of stock in the Revelation 12 sign. The Revelation 12 sign had a very significant fulfillment at the time of the incarnation and birth of Christ. Now, that Revelation 12 sign, just because our solar system and our universe is a gigantic clock and it brings the same patterns around over and over again, some of them on an annual basis, some of them on a monthly basis, some of them on a 60-year basis, and some of them on a centuries-long basis. So the Revelation 12 sign has appeared before, it's going to appear again. It had prophetic significance at the time of the birth of Christ because it perfectly lined up with the birth of Christ and his conception. I don't know if it specifically was his conception or specifically was his birth. So when we come to the Revelation 12 signs here in recent history, like 2017, I don't believe it had any particular thing to say to the church or any particular fulfillment in Israel. I think it's just that same sign come around. And if we were going to assign any meaning to it at all, the meaning would have to be look back and remember the incarnation and birth of Christ. It's pointing to the Messiah. But other than that, it doesn't have any significant meaning. I know a lot of people will be offended over that. Well, what can I say? You know, I see a tremendous effort by a lot of people pointing to all kinds of cool stuff in the heavens and trying to make prophetic significance out of it, and nothing ever comes of it. So I'm sorry, folks. I'm just not a big Revelation 12 sign fan. Why does the angel say in Revelation 7:3, don't hurt the earth, neither the seas nor the trees, if the earth would have been ripped apart by the sixth seal in the previous chapter? Does Revelation chapter 7 rewind? Great question. I think that this is a complete misunderstanding of the order of the book of Revelation, and that's why people have problems. They look at it like the first seal is opened and finishes and closes, and then the second seal opens and finishes and closes, then the third seal, and the visitations go in complete order, end to end, with zero overlap. And I think this is a mistake. It's a very simplistic solution, and it creates a ton of problems. If you let the scriptures put these things in order the way they should be in order, you're not going to have the complications. I want you to look at the signs in the sixth seal. You look at the signs in the heavens, so that we see signs of the sun, signs of the moon, signs of the stars, the heavens rolling like a scroll, and the great day of the Lord has come. Now, if you look at every passage in the Bible that has those signs in the heavens, and you write them all down in a notebook, and you look at the characteristics, and then you take all the phrases that go with it, like the day of the Lord is at hand, and you take all those passages and put them all together, it's talking about the second coming. And it's at the second coming that those signs in the heavens happen. For instance, in Matthew 24, immediately after the tribulation of those days, boom, the signs in the heavens. So it's after the 70th week. It's after the 3.5 years of great tribulation. So if you do this, now you got a problem. How can the sixth seal if it gets open before the seventh seal, how can this event under the sixth seal happen at the second coming? It's because the sixth seal does not begin and end with Revelation chapter 6, verse 12 to Revelation 6:17. The sixth seal also includes all the contents of chapter 7. It includes the four angels being restrained. It includes the four angels being let loose. It includes the sealing of the 144,000. And it includes a great multitude that no man can number. So basically, we have a very interesting pattern here. We have the mention of severe judgment first, and then we have the mention of a minor judgment, and then we have a mention of the first fruits, the 144,000, and then we have a mention of the full harvest. So you see the pattern: big judgment, little salvation, big salvation. That's the pattern. So the sixth seal includes everything from the second half of chapter 6 and everything in chapter 7. Now, when you follow down this path, that means the sixth seal takes us all the way to the second coming. The fact is, all the seals take us all the way to the second coming. The first seal is the rise and reign of the Antichrist spirit in the Antichrist. So from the time that's opened, it doesn't just stop. That goes all the way to the second coming. It won't stop until Christ descends from heaven and crushes it. The second seal takes peace from the earth. Once this is opened, there's no retreat. There is no more peace on earth all the way to the second coming. The third seal introduces famine. War always introduces famine. Once this famine is introduced, it doesn't go a little ways and shut down and get resolved. It runs all the way to the second coming. The fourth seal is the four sword judgments that we read about in the book of Ezekiel. And from the time these are unleashed, they're going to go all the way to the second coming. The fifth seal is the martyrs of the Great Tribulation. From the time that's opened, it runs all the way to the second coming. The sixth seal, if we're going to run things in chronological order rather than in moral order, which they're given in moral order, then we're going to start with the four angels being restrained. And then we're going to see the sealing of the 144,000. And then we're going to see the great outpouring of the great day of the Lord at the second coming. And then we're going to see the gathering of the great multitude after the great tribulation, the gathering of the great multitude that no man can number. Then we go to the seventh seal. The seventh seal introduces the seven trumpets. The seventh trumpet is the arrival of the kingdoms. Plain statement of scripture. So the seventh seal, because it introduces the seven trumpets, that goes all the way to the second coming. The trumpet series is sounded in order, but they end at the second coming with the seventh trumpet. The seven thunders, we don't know anything about them other than the fact that it's going to follow the analogy of those that precede and those that follow. The seven bowls are the last series that are introduced, and they end at the second coming. The sixth bowl is the gathering of the world for Armageddon. The seventh bowl is the end of the mystery of God. So each seal is going to line up and stack and run all the way to the second coming. Then you have, and they stack up on top of each other. Then on top of the seventh seal, you have introduced the seven trumpets, and they go back to back. And that series ends at the second coming. Then you have the seven thunders, and they go back to back, and that series stacks up on top and ends at the second coming. And then you have the bowls, and they're on the very top, a shorter series. From the time they're open, they go back to back all the way to the second coming. So each series ends at the second coming. If we do this, there doesn't have to be any rewind. If we do this, then we don't have to wonder why there's such a ferocious judgment earlier in the tribulation, and then nothing happens that's anywhere near comparison to it until the end. We don't have to worry about trying to figure out how come the kingdom arrives at the seventh trumpet, but it doesn't really arrive at the seventh trumpet. If you have the sixth seal, the seventh trumpet, and the seventh bowl at the second coming, then all the problems are resolved. Has there ever been a female offspring from Nephilim or only males? Well, this is an interesting question. I don't know if I can give you a very definite or specific answer. But just by my experience looking at how the demonic realm and the satanic realm, the fallen angel realm works, there's a lot of perversion there. And I think the angels are probably all uh, male, but the fallen ones manifest themselves at times as females because they're perverted. And I think their offspring can be whatever they want. In fact, when you look at some of the material that L.A. Marzulli and some of his associates in the Nephilim realm have produced, people have had some amazingly scary encounters with female Nephilim. So I think they do. Okay, YouTube channel. I'm not sure what this question is all about. Just out of curiosity, it's from YouTube channel. I don't even know what that means. Question, just out of curiosity, do you think that when someone lies to not spoil a surprise birthday party or something else, God considers it as purposely lying and a sin? Well, trying to keep a surprise birthday party a surprise definitely belongs in a different category than blatantly lying to promote an evil on earth. Do you think women died giving birth to Nephilim babies? Probably. Do you think the Nephilim seed will carry on through the Great Tribulation? Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, they're going to dominate the world in the tribulation. Um, what about the mark of the beast and the potential of Nephilim type DNA? I don't know for sure that the mark of the beast is going to incorporate Nephilim DNA. They wouldn't have um, to defile the human bloodline. Um, Certainly, I think that they're going to hold out to people the opportunity for if they accept the mark of the beast. Not only do they get to be able to buy and sell in the world system, I think they're going to be given uh, offered benefits such as advancements in healthcare so that they can be cured of Parkinson's and cancer and whatever else ails them. Maybe having their life lengthened. Personally, I think that the elite and the chosen few humans that are get to be close to the elite, excuse me, are going to enjoy the greatest benefits from all the DNA research, and everyone else is going to be given bones. Now, um, I do think that they will be required to take series of shots. At least it may not be part of the mark of the beast itself, and that may not be in the mark itself, but certainly it follows in the train of the mark that they will be required to take treatments that are going to tamper with their DNA. And that could be all kinds of stuff. It could be animal DNA, plant DNA, um, could be alien DNA, Nephilim DNA. Who knows for sure? We have a lot of speculations there, and we don't know for sure which ones are true. But we do know they want to tamper with and defile the human DNA. Can we get a debate between you and Dr. Brown? Probably not. I'm not a great fan of debates. I think they're almost worthless. I think debates in a formal debate structure does not favor the best arguments. It favors the best arguer. It favors those that have the best debate personality and the best radio voice and the best charismatic personality. And the truth regularly gets trampled in debates, except for a handful of men who are exceptionally skilled at debating creationism versus evolution. Other than that, most of the debates I watched were a waste of time. I'm just not into formal debating. I do think there's already a great informal debate going online in social media and with YouTube videos. And if that debate format doesn't satisfy people, I don't know what to tell them. Because personally, I would rather uh, to be able to sit down and assimilate the writings of a Joel Richardson or the videos of a Joel Richardson or the books of Michael Brown or the videos of Michael Brown, assimilate them, treat them systematically in my own response. I think that's 10 times better for the listeners than to sit down in a formal limited debate where you get a couple minutes each and you go back and forth like a ping pong ball, and rarely does anything get nailed down. Rarely does anything get answered. It's just a ping pong ball going back and forth. Anyway, I think it's a waste of time as a general rule. I wouldn't say absolutely. Maybe somebody's gifted at public debate, but as a general rule, I think it's a waste of time. If fallen angels and women conceive giants, what are the chances that angels in their normal state are extremely big in comparison to humans? The universe seems vast for grasshopper humans. Yeah, I think there's a couple things going on here. The universe is vast. Personally, I got two thoughts on the size of the universe, as far as not on the size that it's not infinite, but on how far away things are. I think the distance ladder is mistaken because the distance ladder is not based on actual measuring math. It's really hard to use trigonometry to measure anything except for a few of the very closest stars. And you need to have measurements taken from satellites orbiting the sun from one side of the sun and then the other side of the sun. And then you can triangulate and figure out the distance of some of the nearest stars. The farther away the stars go, the worse your math is going to be. When you start getting into much farther out than the closest immediate closest stars, accurate measurement gets to be extremely difficult. Now, we estimate differences with redshift, and I think this is a mistake because I think redshift is a function of several different variables, including orbital motion. It's not merely Doppler effect from something that's moving away from us. I think it's also the effect of light rays traveling through atmosphere around stars and through the different densities in the stellar media. So that is a problem in of itself. The other thing I think is that um, the vast spaces are designed so that we have vast space. You just think of if you got farming at heart and you showed up on in the early 1900s and you took a big piece of territory in western Oklahoma or in North Dakota, South Dakota, or Iowa, you had a wide open space, it's all yours. That would be a welcome thing. But you wouldn't, if that was in your heart, you wouldn't want one little yard in a town. And I think that this universe is just so vast that people are gonna have all the space they want. Now, as far as the giants go, yeah, I do think that angels and women conceive giants. But I don't personally know how big angels are in comparison to human. And here's the reason why. I think that angels are able to appear in different sizes. I think the angels that we see in scripture, some of them look like they're human size, and others of them look like they're massive giants. So I think they're not limited to any particular size. And maybe the resurrection body believers will have similar things. Question: is it possible that Nephilim are shapeshifters like the fallen realm? I think that the demonic, the Nephilim, let me put it this way. The angels definitely have shape-shifting abilities. They can appear in many different ways. They historically used to appear as um, as trolls and witches and warlocks, and now they're appearing as greys and other aliens. They used to appear as little leprechauns and fairies, and now they're appearing as, as I said, greys and aliens. But they also appear as, according to people's fears and superstitions, that's how they appear. I think they're at times appearing like Sasquatch. As far as pure Nephilim go, I think the Nephilim themselves, once they've mingled with human beings, they're pretty much limited to that human form that they've taken on. And the Nephilim, as far as the demons, who are the disembodied Nephilim, well, they're limited to whatever body that they're inhabiting. The Bible reads two kinds of animals, two kinds of every animal on the ark. And do you think the dinosaurs were on the ark? Yes, I do myself. Now, I know that some regard the dinosaurs as part of an earlier creation that precedes the Genesis creation. And that's just how they resolve some of the difficulties with the difference between the existence of creation prior to the 6 days of creation, um, and and that's just where they go. Personally, I think that there were no animal life on Earth prior to the 6 days of creation, in unless the angels were down here alone prior to that. It's hard to say, but um, we have traditions of the dinosaurs all over in ancient history. And so I do believe the dinosaurs came off the flood. They were the dragons in ancient traditions. And the differences between the dragon remains that we find and the dinosaur remains that we find are the dragon tails and the dinosaurs. They're really the same creatures, except that the dragon tails are usually not of the largest size of dinosaurs that we see buried. But even in the Bible, in Job, we read about some absolutely massive dinosaurs. So I do think that they came off the ark and they were here in the earlier ages of the earth. Now, there may well have been genetic manipulation of dragons. That's entirely possible. I'm not going to write that off, because the Nephilim were known to tamper with DNA. They never left anything that God gave them alone. They tampered with everything. Which family member from Noah carried the Nephilim line? I don't think that any of Noah's immediate descendants had any defective DNA. Noah didn't have it. His wife didn't have it. Shem, Ham, and Japheth didn't have it. At least I don't think they did. Now, it's possible that someone might think that um, Noah was pure and his generations only had to apply to Shem, so that there could be a pure Semitic line for the line of the Messiah. But I'm more inclined to think that all three of the offspring were genetically pure, and it was only two of the wives that were impure. If God creates life, why would he permit the growth of the Nephilim seed in the human woman? God often allows the demonic realm to work in a very, very powerful way amongst the human beings, with deception, with manipulation, with with defilement. And it really comes down to the fact that God is interested in having a faithful remnant that follows the Messiah according to the word of God and according to sound biblical discernment. And they're not going to cave into the deceptions. They're not going to be wowed and cowed by the powers of the world. Um, and so we're just dealing in a polluted environment in a polluted world. I mean, really, when you talk about this thing, if God creates life, why would God have allowed man to tamper with genetic material and mix plants and animals and plants and bacteria and animals and bacteria and humans and plants and humans and animals and humans and bacteria, just mingling all this garbage, and we're getting worse and worse at it? Why would, well, God doesn't actually allow it in the sense of it's his, that he's approving of it. He allows this to run its course, disapproving of it. Because if he came down and stopped it now, he would also be stopping the run of grace. And he's not going to stop the run of grace until the end of the age of grace. And then these people perpetrating this stuff will find out how little freedom they had to tamper with God's creation. Did the angels mate with humans after the flood? I suspect that it possibly could have happened, but I favor the theory that there was the Nephilim DNA on the ark, and that was consolidated after the flood and led to the problems that we have. But if we're going to take the Genesis 3:15 passage on the seed war at face value, it implies that there has to be some mating with humans at the end of the age. But all the fossil hominins with Homo erectus and Homo australopithecus and Denisovans and Neanderthals and various stuff be examples of Nephilim? That's hard to say. The one thing I would point out is the Neanderthal skulls in general do not resemble the Nephilim skulls. Now, there might be a few examples that do, but the Neanderthal skulls in general look like normal human skulls if you extrapolate the age of the human beings out to several hundred, 300, 400, 500 years, so that they get bigger brow bridges and bigger jaws, because the human skull continues to grow as people age. Some of the other supposed early hominids are really just monkeys and apes. So there's a lot of interesting questions there, and I'm going to be looking forward to studying Archaeology 101 after the rapture. What is your opinion on watchmen and watchwomen who have dedicated their respective channels to the subject of the rapture? I think it's a good thing. When we see much of the church running away from Bible prophecy, particularly hating on the rapture, I think it's a very good thing that we got a number of YouTubers out there that are really focusing on the rapture. One thing I would point out, I don't know a single rapture channel that only does the rapture. Most of them also have a few other subjects they teach on, and especially they focus on the gospel. Even some of the ones where I've had some differences with, because some of the rapture channels, you well know, they're into the high watch theories, and I'm a wet blanket when it comes to the high watch theories. I don't believe any of them. They've all been bombing for a couple decades, and they're going to continue to bomb right up until the rapture. And I don't think the rapture of the church has anything to do with Jewish feast days. If you recall, when the Lord, the head of the church, ascended to heaven, he ascended off the Jewish calendar. It was 40 days after first fruits and 10 days prior to Pentecost. So he wasn't on the Jewish calendar. The Gentile church was formed after the Jewish remnant had had the fulfillment of the prophecies in the Gentile remnant, the prophecies that are implied by the feasts. And I think that the fall trumpet, the fall feasts are going to be fulfilled in the Jewish remnant after the rapture of the church. So you had the Jewish remnant, saw the fulfillment, then the Gentiles were added, and the church was formed. And then the church will be taken out, and then the fall feast will be fulfilled in Israel. So a lot of the stuff that some of these rapture channels are focusing on is good material. It's just misplaced when it's applied to the rapture. You take that stuff and apply it to Israel, and it will explode in value. Okay, we got a few more questions here. Are all the ranks of fallen angels and evil spiritual powers united under Satan's authority, or are they like the secret societies, somewhat independent of each other but pursuing the same end? I definitely think there's division in the fallen ranks. This is a classic example of frenemies. Uh, they're united against their common enemy, and the closer we get to the end, the more united they're going to be. But they've been infighting for centuries, trying to dominate. I mean, you have the Prince of Persia fighting the Prince of Greece. This is one angelic power fighting another angelic power. Neither of them were in service to Jehovah God. The four angels who are held in the great Euphrates River and are released in Revelation 9:14, are those angels part of the incursion? It's possible that they were amongst those that were in the original incursion, but I suspect it's more likely that they are a different set of problematic angels who the Lord just holding them in restraint. This is restraining the mystery of iniquity until it's time for them to be released. And I will have you note that when the restrainer releases the mystery of iniquity, I mean, we often talk about it like a dam being blown and all that water comes, and there's truth in that. But that restraining hand doesn't give the mystery of iniquity absolute free reign to do anything they please. He just continually removes his restraint little by little, all the way through the tribulation until he allows them at the very end to do what's inexcusably wrong, and then he's going to judge them. How did the Nephilim get here again after the flood? Well, many of the Nephilim teachers think there was a second incursion and they cohabited with women a second time. I'm inclined to think that the best explanation is there was genetic Nephilim material in the wives of Ham and Japheth, and it went through the flood, and through angelic help and demonic help, those lines were consolidated and they manifested uh, a new line of Nephilim, the giants. Well, there's a lot of interesting questions about the RH blood and other lines of blood, and is that evidence of being tainted? I don't know enough about the subject to speak with any kind of authority on that blood stuff. The only thing I can say is I think it is definitely certain that if men are carrying Nephilim DNA, it would definitely show up in their blood and in their DNA. But exactly what we're looking for, that's beyond my realm of expertise. Ham had sex with Noah's wife, and then Noah cursed Canaan because of it. Was Noah's wife or Ham tainted? I don't know. I mean, it's a theory that Ham had sex with Noah's wife when it says that he uncovered his father's nakedness, but it's a theory. I'm not sure that that is necessarily true. And I don't know about the question, was Noah's wife or Ham tainted? I don't think either of them had Nephilimic tainting. Doesn't mean I'm right, but I don't think they did. I think the problem, because Noah was pure in his generations, that would imply that his genealogy prior to him was pure. It implies that he was pure, his wife was pure, and their three sons were pure. I think the impurity would have to come through Ham's wife or Japheth's wife. And again, we have a question on the RH blood type. And the question is that the enmity between the serpent seed and the seed of the woman? And I don't think so. But there is definitely going to be blood type problems involved in the Nephilim line. Okay, so we have finished the questions. All right, I want to thank everybody for showing up tonight. For sticking around. We went for 2 hours tonight. That's a pretty good live stream. Hopefully you found the live stream profitable, found some encouragement in it, found some instruction in it. I find the subject very, very fascinating myself. It gives us a backstory to the flood, a backstory to creation, a backstory to the whole program of redemption, a backstory to the Antichrist, a backstory to the problem at the end of the millennium. And if we understand this backstory, I think we're going to understand the redemption story a lot more clearly. So, at any rate, thank you for showing up. I just want to encourage you, if you're listening and you don't yet know for sure that you are saved, or if you know that you're not saved and you want to be saved, I just want to encourage you. Salvation is a very simple thing. It's not your religion, it's not the church you go to, it's not baptism, not any particular form of baptism. I'm not going to say these questions are completely unimportant, but they're definitely not the important question. The important question is, do you believe that Jesus Christ is the eternal Son of God, manifest in human flesh, come down to earth for the sole purpose of walking amongst man so he could die on the cross, so there's divine blood shed to pay for man's sin? If you believe that Jesus is the way of salvation, that he is the sacrifice for sin, that he is God's way of salvation, then you'll have eternal life. It's as simple as that. You can turn your life over to him in a prayer while you're driving your car, while you're taking a shower, while you're laying awake in bed, while you're walking on a path in the park, while you're riding your bike. You can get down on your knees and pray. You can lay down on the floor and pray with tears. It doesn't matter how you pray or where you pray. All you have to do is turn your heart over to Jesus and trust that he is the way of salvation. Trust the man, trust his work on the cross, and you will have eternal life. Now, for those of you that are already saved, I want to encourage you. As we look around this world, things are getting darker and darker. Things are getting scarier and scarier. Um, we're seeing the pressure raised with Israel against Hamas, and Israel against Hezbollah, and Israel against Iran, Israel against the Houthis, America struggling with these nations. We see pressure here in America with the upcoming election. We see more chess maneuvering in this election than we've ever seen in any election in history past in America. This is absolutely mind-boggling, the things that are happening, and we haven't seen the last chess moves, folks. We don't even have any guarantee that Kamala and what's his name are going to be on the ticket come November 2nd. Things could change quickly. So, and you have the pressures that Iran is threatening to assassinate President Trump and probably willing to pay tens of millions of dollars to do it. We have the increasing pressure with Ukraine and Russia. This whole world is like people piling up powder kegs full of gunpowder, and they're all smoking, and eventually this whole thing is going to blow. So, in the midst of all of this building up pressure in the world, folks, keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep looking to him. We might have to go through a lot more than we want to go through before that rapture trumpet blows. But you can rest assured that we are not going to go through the great tribulation, or the tribulation, no matter how much stage setting we see. We're going to go up in the rapture. So keep your eyes on Jesus. Keep your eyes wide open, your brain engaged, and the heart on fire. And we will see you next time. Take care and God bless.